Hello everyone and welcome back to the video. If you've heard the terms Grush, Drush, or Flush around the Age of Empires 2 community and had no idea what they mean or what they refer to, you came to the right video. Today I'm going to be explaining all of those terms, but not only that, I'm going to go ahead and describe every single popular opening strategy in today's metagame. I will describe what the strategy is, how to go about that strategy, and what the goal of every strategy is. This will prepare you when doing these strategies and when going up against them. Now, when we talk about opening strategy, the opening refers to basically the first 15 to 20 minutes of the game. The reason why we can't predict what's going to happen after the 20-minute mark is that there are simply too many variables in Age of Empires 2 that it's impossible to know what the game will look like or what is even the goal at that point. Every single game is different, and depending on what happens, we have to just adapt to the situation. We also have the unknown variable of our opponent, and we just can never predict what he's going to go for, so we have to stay pretty flexible after that 20-minute mark. But before that 20-minute mark, we can definitely have a strategy and come in prepared with an opening. This will give us, the chance to gain control of the game and set the tempo right from the get-go. I've broken this video down into 6 top strategies that are extremely popular, so once you learn all of these 6 strategies, you're never going to get surprised in basically 95% of your games. There are some other openings that are not as popular that I'm not really going to cover, however, for the most part, I've got everything you need in this video. Let's go ahead and hop right in. Starting off at number 1, we've got the Drush. Now, the Drush stands for Dark Age Rush, and that's what basically the D stands for. And this is done pretty much every time in the exact same way when it comes to the unit choice, because we only have one unit to choose from, which is of course the militia available in the barracks. However, there are a lot of details and nuances between Drush strategies that you need to be aware of, especially if you want to catch on to what your opponent is thinking. The first choice you need to make is whether you're doing 2 militias or 3 militias. 2 militia is a cheaper rush, but it has less potential because you have less units. 3 militia is slightly more expensive, but you have more potential to kill villagers because you have that 1 extra unit, and with 3 militias, it's a little easier to trap your opponent's villagers and isolate one to be able to kill it a little bit more quickly. If you go for 2 militia, you don't need to gather any extra gold, so you just go for the barracks, make 2 militia, and send them across like normal. If you go for the 3 militia, you need to send 1 villager to the main gold, take 10 gold, and then go back to your town center, and that lets you afford the 3rd militia. The reason why we don't make a mining camp is because it's simply not worth the investment of 100 wood to just take the 10 gold. So we skip the mining camp entirely and just snag that 10 gold. The second option you need to consider with the Drush is whether you make your barracks before the mill, which is called the pre-mill Drush, or after the mill, which is a post-mill Drush, or more or less a standard Drush. Now, the pre-mill is way more popular these days because the metagame is extremely quick and people want to be the first to punch. And the reason why it's important to be the first to punch with the Drush is because the strategy itself, the main goal is to gain the initiative and put the pressure on your opponent as the first person to do that. So if you do it earlier, it's generally considered better. Now, the goal of the Drush isn't actually to kill a bunch of units or to do game-ending damage. We're, like I said earlier, gaining initiative, gaining the map right away, and forcing our opponent to adapt. You've got 2 main benefits of gaining the initiative. One is that you could surprise your opponents and gain some free advantage, and the second is that you get to see how your opponent reacts to it. So we get the first punch and we get to see what his follow-up is so that we can adapt right from the get-go into our own strategy. Now, the goal of the Drush isn't to just run in and attack your opponent's villagers and, if you lose the militia, we lose them. The goal is actually to attack your opponent on either his berries or his woodline with the 2 or 3 militia plus our scout, and we're really looking to isolate one of his villagers and pick it off in its entirety. If we hit a villager until it's 1 HP but he keeps it alive, that is a terrible situation because that villager, even on 1 HP, can gather res like normal, and we basically accomplished very little. So instead, what we're looking to do is attack the villager, and if he attacks us back with a bunch of his vills, we can run our militia back to conserve their HP, thus causing idle time and maintaining our pressure. If our opponent makes a mistake and we're able to isolate a villager, it's okay to commit to it, and even if we lose 1 militia or a lot of our HP, if you can kill a villager, it's indeed a very successful venture, and it's definitely considered worth it. Keep in mind though, in most cases you won't be getting any villager kills, so simply be happy with just annoying your opponent and forcing him to idle his villagers, constantly attacking you, you run away, and him having chased you. And this way we consider it also a successful Drush if you just keep that pressure up for 1 to 2 minutes before he hits feudal age. We also want him to spend his early feudal age clearing our Drush instead of counterattacking us right away. Now, you've got 2 follow-ups to the Drush typically. You can either go Drush into a fast castle, which makes you stay a little bit longer in Dark Age to then skip Feudal Age entirely and then go straight to Castle Age. Or you see the Drush into Flush, which is basically Drush into Flush, which stands for Feudal Rush. So typically we see a few militia, 2 or 3, you put the pressure, and then you go up to Feudal Age as fast as possible. And then in Feudal Age, you can follow it up with 1 or 2 ranges, archers, and skirmishers. And some people even can follow it up with some scouts. So you have a ton of options there with the Drush. Extremely flexible opening, and definitely one to watch out for. Next opening we're going to talk about is the straight archers. This is also sometimes referred to as a flush, a feudal rush, as I mentioned earlier. But the goal of the straight archers is rather simple. I don't have much to talk about here. You go up to Feudal Age pretty much as fast as possible. Right now, the most popular one is 20 or 21 pop. Older builds of straight archers are 22 and 23 pop. However, I highly recommend if you're using a 22 or 23 pop archer build to get off that and switch to a 20 or 21 pop build, because like I said, today's metagame is extremely quick and we have to adapt our builds to match that metagame. So yeah, as soon as you get to Feudal Age with 20 or 21 pop, you get to drop a range right away, and typically we pick up double bit axe as well to have a good economy in terms of wood, and then we just go with 1 range archer production at first. You can also, if your opponent is on scouts, mix in a couple spearmen to defend your archers from those early scouts. And the goal is to get a fast blacksmith after the 1 range to pick up fletching by the time you have 3 or 4 archers. This lets us get a first attack with 3-4 archers, 1 to 2 spears, and fletching that can be quite deadly if your opponent doesn't respect it. Following up this pressure, players tend to just wall up their base so that they don't have to deal with late Feudal Age shenanigans when your opponent has a bunch of skirms and scouts. We can stay walled up, and so we don't have to even deal with that. We can just defend behind our walls with our archers, and it's an extremely safe build. I will say one concern with the straight archers is that you're not making a lot of military, so if your opponent is heavily pressuring you, you could run into some problems. So if you're going straight archers, make sure that you stay flexible and you're ready to commit a little bit more to Feudal Age than you might have wanted to. Alright, the next strategy, number 3 here, we've got the Scout Rush. Scout Rush is one of the most popular builds, and the reason for that is because you get instant map control and a very fast punch. Of course, the Drush will come in first if it's Drush versus Scout Rush. However, Scouts will hit a lot faster than Archers because they simply move across the map much more quickly. Typically, Scout builds are 19 or 20 pop right now. Like I said earlier, for the Archer builds, 21 and 22 pop are popular for Scouts, but those are the old builds. So if you're on 21 or 22 pop, switch that up and try 20 pop Scouts. It's a really smooth build. It might take a little bit of practice, but once you get it down, it's extremely safe and extremely stable. When going for 20, no pun intended, when going for 20 pop scouts, players will drop their stable right away, and similar to the archer build, you could also make 1 or 2 spears if your opponent is also on the scout rush. The goal of the scout rush is to gain initiative of the map, or gain the map and gain the initiative, and use 3 to 4 scouts right from the get-go to attack our opponent and try to pick off villagers. 3-4 scouts can surround villagers quite easily, so with the scout rush we look for stray villagers, we look for opponents' wood lines, and as long as there's no spear, we can easily engage onto the villagers. Now, if you run into enemy spears, which is very likely, the general rule I recommend is 3 scouts will kill 1 spear. If you've got 3 scouts, you can easily kill 1 spear, and you should take only 2 hits. If you've got 6 scouts, you can start to fight 2 spears. If you've got 9 scouts, you can fight 3 spears. And if you upgrade your scouts later on in Feudal Age with bloodlines, forging, and armor, you can start to take on spears quite easily. Like 10 scouts can easily kill 5 spears if you've got bloodlines, forging, and armor on them. But of course, this is more of a late Feudal Age thing. Going back to that early Feudal Age with our 3-4 scouts, we're looking to attack our opponent, and then behind that, we can simply wall up our base to make sure we're safe against archer rushes or anything that our opponent is trying to throw against us. My recommendation with Scout Rush is that you don't stop making any scouts until you're fully walled and until you know you're safe. You can also continue making scouts if your opponent is open and if you're finding value, if you're doing damage with them, because scouts is a unit that scales extremely well into the mid-late Feudal Age, because like I said, once you get bloodlines, you can start eating up spears, you can start destroying archers, and it's the most powerful individual unit in Feudal Age when fully upgraded. So make sure that you're committing to scouts a little bit more than you might want to, or that you might be used to rather. Next up, we've got the Men-at-Arms. Men-at-Arms strategy is, you can call it Men-at-Arm Rush, you can call it MAA, so whatever you see Men-at-Arms being referred to, it's this strategy that I will cover just now. And basically the idea with Men-at-Arms is that we make the 3 militia on the way up to feudal age, so with a barracks, but different than the Drush because we're going up to feudal age first, and then we're going to start making the militia. And typically for men-at-arms, it's 3 militia. However, some people like to go for 4, which is definitely viable. 4 is just a little bit more commitment, nothing too special there. And the idea is we go across the map with the militia as soon as we have them made, and then when we hit feudal age, we right away click the men-at-arm technology from the barracks. It's 100 food and 40 gold, so it's a little bit more investment than the Drush. However, the men-at-arm strategy, or the men-at-arms themselves, are much stronger than militia. They have 6 attack and an extra 5 HP, and so if you can surround an enemy villager with 3 men-at-arms and a scout, you can kill it very quickly. It's really effective strategy at killing villagers. The goal of the men-at-arms rush is actually to do a ton of damage. It's not like the other rushes that are a little bit lower impact and a little bit less investment. Men-at-arms is a heavy investment. Why? Because we're getting a technology that does literally nothing else but upgrade those 3 units. So if those 3 units don't get value, then you're going to be in a little bit of a pickle and you're going to be falling behind. The typical follow-up for men-at-arms is by following it up with 1 range and going archers. So the men-at-arm build is quite similar to the straight archer build. However, the men-at-arm one is more aggressive because you're getting the initiative with the men-at-arms. But of course, with the more aggressive, we have the more investment. So it is a higher risk for a higher reward. But if your men-at-arm rush is successful, you can kill 3-4 villagers. You can end the game in early feudal age if you land the men-at-arms on the right spot. I highly recommend that you plan out your attack nice and early. Before feudal age kicks in, you know where you want to hit, what you want to target, and you keep your scout close by so that when your scout and men-at-arms are ready, you can target one vill and focus it down all the way. Once that vill dies, you move on to the next one. If your opponent is walling up to keep your men-at-arms away from his wood lines, just continue to run around his base until he shows you an opening. Most people will wall a little bit, but then they're going to make mistakes, and so as soon as you find the opening, make sure to capitalize, jump on it, and pressure your opponent, and punish him for walling up early and trying to stay safe without making any military. Alright, next up we got number 5 for the strategies, and this one is a bit more of a beginner build. It's the Fast Castle, or FC, if you might be seeing it written in the chat. Fast Castle is done in 3 types, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's simply a little bit too long to describe every single one, but basically the 3 types are as follows. The first one is just making your market and blacksmith in feudal age to get up to castle age as quickly as possible, and since we have made our market and blacksmith, we don't need to make a barracks at all and therefore save a little bit of wood. So the first build is like that, and then you can just add your town centers and develop your economy. You only do this build if you don't need to fight early and you have a lot of time to build up your economy because we have no military. The second type is the same opening with market blacksmith, no barracks, but this time instead of booming and developing our economy, we're simply gonna go for either a castle drop to make our unique unit, or we can go for a siege and monk rush, which is also called a smush, but that's not that common of a term. Siege and Monk Rush could be a good way to either defend or to attack in a very early castle age, and it is considered, generally speaking, a pretty all-in push. The third type of a fast castle is the one done with making the barracks and then making either 1 range or 1 stable, and then the blacksmith. Once you get to castle age, you can either make a few knights or you can make a few crossbow or archers and then upgrade them to crossbow. This is a fast castle done with the purpose of gaining map control with the military, and this is a fast castle that is more or less for Arabia style maps or for some maps like Arena where you want to use the scouts or some units that you make from the production building to fight for the relic and fight in early castle. In general, I recommend going for a fast castle build if you don't need to fight in feudal age, because if your feudal age army doesn't get value and your opponent gets up to castle age earlier than you, then he's going to get access to really powerful options like siege, monk, and knights, and it's going to be very hard for your feudal army to fight against that. So feudal rushes are only meant to go for if you're able to do damage, which is the case on most open land maps. However, if the map is a little bit more closed or if it's a bit more of a defensive game, fast castle is your go-to strategy. Next up, I'm going to quickly talk about the tower rush, which is also referred to as the Drush. Basically, a tower rush is just going up to feudal age as fast as possible, even 18 pop, sometimes 19 pop, sending 4 or 5 vills forward and making towers across your opponent's entire base. This is also quite common to combine with men-at-arms, so you might see a men-at-arm Drush or MAA Drush, And Men at Arms Tower Rush is slightly different. We go up like 20 or 21 pop, but we go forward with our 3 Men at Arm and the 4 villagers. So with our Men at Arm push, we can look for the vills, look to do damage, and then also get a tower in your opponent's face. And this is by far the most all-in rush that I have, or the most all-in opening that we have on the list. Very aggressive, very risky, but of course with all that risk comes all that reward. If you're able to kill a few vills with the Men at Arms, tower an important wood line to force them off it, your opponent can just be dead within minutes or even within seconds if you land on the right area. In general, I don't recommend going for the Drush because it's simply a little bit too risky in most cases, and in today's metagame you often just run into Men at Arms, you run into straight archers, and those builds tend to be pretty good against the Drush because they're just going to get archers out in the field too quickly, and your Men at Arms and your vills are going to be quite vulnerable at your opponent's base. So it's more risky to go for this strategy now than it was in the past. Alright, and for the last strategy on this list, it's going to be for the water players. It is the Grush or the Galley Rush. The Grush is used for maps like Islands or even maps like Baltic or Mediterranean, maps where water is the main part of it. And typically for a Grush, we go up to Feudal Age as fast as possible, and we don't make a single building on land like barracks, archery range stable, none of that. Instead, we make 2 or 3 docks, and we go for either galleys or we go for a mix of fire galleys and demolition rafts. I recommend either going pure galleys and not mixing in too many of the other 2 ships, because with galleys you want to mass them up so that you can pick up fletching and have a group of like 6 to 9 galleys that can hit and run other ships, or you don't make a single galley. It's really that black and white. If you're committing to galleys, you go all in on them. If you're not committing to galleys, don't make a single one, because the galley is only good if you have a big mass, and it's terrible if you have only just 1 or 2. So if you have time to build up a navy, go for galleys. If you need to fight right away, go for fire galleys. And then if your opponent's on fire galleys, you can make some demos and look for some nice hits. It's really quite simple and quite mundane. That's why I don't really like water play, but I can cover the entire strategy in just a minute or 2. So I went ahead and did that, and hopefully that helps in your water games if you enjoy that. Going on to Castle Age, you upgrade War Galley, and that one upgrade will upgrade your galleys, your fire ships, or your fire galleys, and your demos. So that one upgrade covers all 3 units. It might be a little confusing for the new players, but that's how it works. And then in Imperial Age, they all get their separate upgrade, and sometimes your civ might have that upgrade or might not, but every single civilization gets the War Galley upgrade. Alright, that's going to do it for this video. I hope you guys found it interesting. I hope you guys learned something from it. This is a good video to come back to if you're ever unsure about a strategy. Let me know if I missed any openings out, and let me know in the comments what those openings are. Make sure they're popular openings, because I can't simply cover every single opening. And if you have any questions, also leave them in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you guys in the next one. Peace.